Hi everybody, we're Manycat Studios and welcome to our talk on decoding games accessibility consultancy. Some introductions on who we are at Manycat and why we have the expertise to be able to tell you these things. I'm Harriet and I'm a white woman with brown hair braided to one side with blue eyes. I am wearing a nice stripy jumper and pink headphones. I'm the bossy woman project manager type at Manycats. I get to tell Chris what to do a lot, which is fun. And I just try and keep all of our projects organised and on track, try being the operative word. I've been an accessibility consultant with lived experience for around 5 years now, working with first-party console studios, indies, art projects, national charities, and so on. And I do community talks on accessibility for games. You can get me on Twitter, Wonderpuss Gospel.
Hi, and I'm Chris. I'm the other half of Manycats. I originally founded it, and I am a white man with brown hair and a brown beard and blue eyes. I'm currently wearing my blue Third Kind Games hoodie. I work at Third Kind Games as a associate producer, as well as obviously doing accessibility bits at Manycats, including the podcasts. I'm also a person who has lived experience, and as a deaf hard of hearing person, I rely on a lot of drawing on that to know what I mean about accessibility. I've worked with small companies, big companies, as well as charity organisations just like Harriet. And I'd like to remind everybody that this talk is our viewpoint into accessibility consultancy. So if you want to expand your knowledge and get a more of a sample size of what's going on out there, maybe to listen to other accessibility consultants and find out what they know about things.
So let's start with the big question. What is an accessibility consultant? In short, it's a specialist subject matter expert who, through professional or lived experience, is appropriately able to identify those potential accessibility issues and help problem solve solutions. Hired throughout the world for things like accessibility for buildings, web accessibility, and things like that, but obviously most relevant to us is games accessibility. So essentially, it's someone your studio hires. A studio will hire on a short-term or long-term contract basis. Some consultants end up getting hired full-time, which is increasing the case in recent years. There are many routes into accessibility consultancy. There are primarily two routes. Traditionally, you've got your formal experience. So that will be the previous route most accessibility consultants came from would be things like human computer interactions, user research, occupational health. But this also can be considered with skills from other departments within the games industry, such as game design or UX. The other route, which is the route we have, is lived experience. So that is someone who will have experience a fair amount of the time from birth, so decades of experience in some cases of what it is like to live the life of somebody who is disabled or neurodiverse or has a long-term health condition, that barriers occur when playing games. That's us, that's what we are. So what does an accessibility consultant do? Another big question. So depending on your experience levels and your speciality as someone with lived experience in particular, you could be doing all sorts. Some examples of how we've been tasked to work as individuals and together is things like testing and QA. So a client may give you a special build that has features that they want to be evaluated for accessibility and see how accessible they are within your specialization. And you'll be given feedback, written or verbal, or however you communicate, and they'll look to act on that. Might be doing stuff like design and ideation, so helping clients formulate ideas for accessibility improvements to their project. So for example, maybe helping, if you were someone who had low or no vision, you may be helping a studio design ways to allow for menu narration to be implemented into the game. You will most likely, as someone with lived experience, also be helping a lot with sensitivity and representation, advising on things like how you'd like to see your disabilities represented in games, making sure any representation is done with respect and it's grounded in authenticity so that games can have characters that represent the wide variety of people that live in the world. It might also be helping with reading job specs or other documentation, press releases and so on, to make sure that companies are communicating respectfully with disabled and neurodiverse people when they're trying to attract talent, communicate internally, or just doing their marketing. You might also be doing things like this, training and talks, educational, talking to studios and communities. You might be training in-house on things like inclusive and universal design methods, or even just talking about what life is like as a disabled or neurodiverse person. And finally, research and strategies. This is things like helping with organizational structure. How do we implement accessibility into our company when we don't do it yet? You might be advising on things like how to whether you'll have an accessibility person on the team or will it be a separate department. You might also help with implementing accessibility frameworks and guidelines that you might know about and might be skilled enough to sort of communicate with people on how they could implement that into their game design process. So when is the best point to get an accessibility consultant in? How do they actually help? Where in the production pipeline is best for them? Most are, in fact, I guarantee accessibility consultants at the conference today in person, digitally online, or even watching this back later on will be nodding their head profusely when I say the best time, the optimal time to get a consultant in, if you can't get them in now as soon as possible, if you haven't already, is at the pre-production stage as early as possible. They're more effective that way. An example of some of the things that consultants can help you with, like I'm going to go through them. It's not exhaustive. There are different ways that consultants on an individual level can help, depending on experience and specialties and where their expertise comes from. So, like I say, in pre-production, this is your time to get that early input on features. Consultants can help you solve those accessibility problems before they become hard, or in even some cases impossible to fix without breaking the entire game, costing you a lot of money, and in general, it's just better this way. Some consultants might be able to collaborate on things like integrating accessibility pipelines. So how do we implement accessibility? How are we working out those metrics for measuring accessibility throughout development? And then maybe some who might be able to advise on adhering to any sort of legal guidelines, laws, legislations when it comes to things like maybe the CVAA or the EAA, so there's accessibility acts, and advising on how to stick to those and make it more accessible games that way. During production, you can get those consultants in more regularly, for example. You can get them on feature reviews with that accessibility lens, and then use that feedback as a barometer to sort of measure up your accessibility progress. During productions is a really good time for getting sort of ongoing training and supporting with implementing that universal or inclusive design thinking and helping your team be more effective in how they implement accessibility throughout production. Now, at release, this is where a lot of studios, big and small, tend to be, we've completed a game, now we should make sure it's accessible. This is not the optimal time, as many people will tell you, but it is something that some consultants have experience with. I like to call it accessibility triage. So that's taking the game in its final or release state and giving feedback and prioritization on features or elements to fix for that improved accessibility. You might also have some accessibility consultants that, just before release might have experience on advising on adhering to any like specific platform accessibility requirements, which is becoming an increasingly common occurrence now, and being able to support your release team in doing that. So taking all those things into account, what kind of skills does one need to be an accessibility consultant outside of the knowledge and things like that? Well, lived experience or professional education is one thing, but it's sort of connecting those experiences with working in the games industry. So the first one is confidence. because you're going to need to be able to talk to a lot of different people from a lot of different places with a lot of different attitudes about how barriers affect yourself or others, and be able to do it in a way that promotes learning and engagement. You know, how you specifically communicate is going to depend on your situation. And I know a lot of us with that lived experience might not have a whole lot of innate confidence because of the way being disabled or neurodiverse in society currently is. But pretending and knowing and understanding that your lived experience combined with your passion and your knowledge of accessibility and how it relates to games is valuable. And knowing that can help a lot with building up that confidence. You're going to need some research skills. You're going to need to be able to keep up to date on the landscape of games accessibility and the broader accessibility world as well, and work out how those things apply to games. You're going to be doing this a lot. It's going to make up a significant part of the work you do outside of the work that you'll be getting paid for. Most of your spare time is going to be researching companies, researching new accessibility things, reading up papers on new accessibility options, things like that, networking with peers, and getting this broader understanding of how the accessibility field for games is moving forward. Being able to analyse and relay statistics and information, keeping up to date on the latest statistics for how many disabled people work in the industry, how many neurodiverse people play games, it's going to go a long way when trying to convince people about accessibility features or changes. Although the landscape is changing for the better, there are still going to be people you're going to need to convince with facts. And then you've got empathy. Now, empathy is really important, not just for other people, but for yourself, and not just for yourself. It's also for other people with disabilities and other neurodiverse people outside of your specialty, and also for those who are learning and they want to learn that in good faith. Being able to understand and connect with others' points of view and their journeys, both personal and professional, disabled or non-disabled, it will build you a deeper understanding of how and when solutions to accessibility problems can be implemented and how accessibility features apply to people, whether they're disabled or not. And finally, I wouldn't say it's essential, but it is extremely helpful, and some knowledge of the game dev pipeline in any capacity goes a long way. It'll set you well on your way to be able to convey exactly when and where solutions can be, knowing what department's responsible for which element, and make a lot of difference when trying to persuade for changes because it comes from a place of expertise within those areas. A little bit of a negative here, but it's setting boundaries really. There are things that you can't do as an accessibility consultant. The first one is IANAL. I am not a lawyer. Knowing about laws and legislation and advising on it is one thing, but you are not a replacement for a legal team. Don't feel like you need to be brushing up for a bar exam just to be able to do your job. Keep up to date on it, but unless it is actually your job as a lawyer, it's not your job. Then it's free labour, it's not free. Be wary of people asking for just a bit of time. It will roll away with you, it will get away from you, and next thing you know, you've given hours and hours of free consultancy and you didn't realise. It's also the labour of it, especially if you've disabled or neurodiverse yourself. Your expertise is valuable, as is your time and the effort that you have to go to be able to be present and working. That's valuable. Make sure that you are balancing your free work with paid work, because free work is fine in specific circumstances, but doing it for free all the time, it does get out of control quite easily. And make sure that you're not burning out on all that labour outside of those invoices. And finally, that the world does not rest on your shoulders. Much as we'd like to, we're all very passionate about what we do, we're not able to fix every single accessibility problem solo. Solving accessibility problems is a group effort, and working alongside peers, it's not just fun, but it's essential to building a broader picture of solutions to accessibility problems.
Still your slide. Sorry, I'll chop that there. Thanks, Harriet. If everything she said sort of speaks true to you, and you still want to be a accessibility consultant, then oh, sorry, I should start that again. Sorry, chop there. Thanks, Harriet. As you might think, there's a lot of value that accessibility consultants can bring, especially to studios and games companies out there. Most importantly, we bring an authentic viewpoint to a lot of features designed and the gameplay elements that we're trying to create. Especially if you come from a lived experience background, then you have a reasonable assumption of what to expect as a person using said accessibility feature, and that is really important. For development teams, it's important to get consultants in because this reduces the pressure on them. You're hired because you are an expert in accessibility, and we want to hear about that as games developers. And it takes the weight of other developers doing essentially a double role a lot of the times. Take the pressure off them so they can focus on their role and they can work with you on your role as an accessibility consultant. As Harriet has mentioned before, like the sooner you get a consultant in, especially an accessibility consultant, the cheaper it will be in the long run. The best quote that we keep hearing at the Games Accessibility Conference is about, you can't put the blueberries in the muffin after it's baked. And that is really just a case of accessibility. The sooner you get somebody in, the cheaper it will be in the long run because you don't have to retrofit everything afterwards, especially in release. And also, the fact that if you're a studio and you're working with accessibility consultants with lived experience, then you're actually showing that you're working with disabled and neurodivergent people out there, especially if you're creating accessibility features for the community you're trying to serve. If you're working with that community, then it shows a lot more faith that you're going to do a good job with the accessibility feature. But as always, there could be potential drawbacks in working with consultants, and this includes actually recruiting them and finding these people so that you can hire them. If you're a studio and looking for an accessibility consultant, like, where do you begin? And it is a common trend that there's a lot of skill gap in accessibility because there's not enough of us out there working in accessibility yet. And especially a lot of people are getting snapped up by the bigger studios to work full time for them. It gets harder and harder to find consultants to come into your studio and help you with your features. This sort of ties into there's like a limited viewpoint as in terms of as a community, we hope to get more and more people in to sort of raise the bar of like other people working accessibility, so it doesn't become very insular and very bubbled. We should always raise the platform for each other and help each other to succeed in this industry. When working with consultants with lived experience, they might have needs that need to be catered for in terms of the workplace, and this might require a lot of flexibility compared to your core workforce. So you might have to work weird hours to sort of get your accessibility consultant in, so that might be something that you have to work with. As a consultant, you might not know everything about accessibility. You've got a lived experience of a certain viewpoint, then you need to be clear that about your sort of knowledge in accessibility. This ties into obviously Harriet's saying about research and learning and keep pushing yourself to sort of see more. As I've said here before, because it's hard to recruit, there's obviously a lack of extra opportunity for junior and new people into accessibility, and we need to really sort of create opportunities for people to learn how to implement accessibility in games. And as we've said before, you always end up working more than you're actually paid. You may just do a day work with a studio, but in reality is you'll end up preparing for that day the day before. So every day you put in, you normally would work an extra day to sort of prepare for that. So you need to be mindful of that when working together with studios or as consultants. But even after all that, you're like, Chris, how do you become a freelancer? How do I become an accessibility consultant? Then you need to really start thinking about you and what that means for yourself. Because as we said, we are lived experience people. This is how we got started. We draw upon our own disability and neurodiversity to sort of apply that to a games development situation, and you need to do the same. Who are you? What value are you bringing to a games development team? If it's lived experience, how do you apply that into a working professional situation? If you're coming from a different industry, you might be working in a web design background with accessibility knowledge that you think will be valuable for game development. Talk about that. Think about bringing that into the context of games. Think about how you are actually connected to games. Do you know anybody working for studios? Do you know anybody who actually actively involved as a games developer? Work with your network. Start building a network if you don't have that. And this is what we sort of say about jumping on opportunities. Harriet's a big advocate for looking out for opportunities and jumping on with all the confidence and feet first that you could do well. So this is all about sort of looking out there and looking for opportunities. Things won't come to you. You need to seek things out. As we said before, if you're a junior or new to this industry or new to the workforce in general, it's going to be a lot harder, and we do acknowledge that, and a lot of people will acknowledge that and will try to help you the best they can. So don't be scared or timid if you are just starting out. And again, you are a professional, you need to research everything, including taxes. I know it's a hard point, but you need to work out what taxes you need to pay as a freelancer, how this impacts you and your income, and if you receive benefits, what's that impact of your benefit, the support that you receive. So you need to sort of do your research before starting actively getting payment for your work. And then obviously create a CV or a resume, for your freelancing, gig. Studios will want to know your professional experience, your professional background. So maybe start jotting down what that is. If it's lived experience, how do you apply that into a professional situation? You can't just say, oh, I'm disabled, therefore I am, the best person for this. You need to say maybe why. It's living as a disabled person, I can apply my knowledge in everyday life to making a game with you. And this really ties in again to marketing yourself. This is all about being confident, which is a skill that Harriet advocates. Get involved with the industry. The industry is amazing, and it is ready for people like ourselves to sort of jump in and talk about games. There's one thing about games: everybody loves talking about games, and so it's a very different ways that you can get involved in the industry. Main thing is sort of networking over social media, attending events if you can. There are virtual events out there as well. Get involved in Discord channels, whether that's things like the London Games Dev one, or Slack channels like the UK Games Industry Slack that have loads and loads of different working professionals in there that will have knowledge and experiences that they can share. So really start sort of just getting involved virtually if you can. And this ties into sort of using social media. Use it to your advantage. Don't work for social media. Make social media work for you. So whether that's like Twitter or Mastodon or LinkedIn, you need to get involved in sort of the discussion, the topics that are happening out there. People want to know about you, and you need to start sort of advertising yourself as a person who may be disabled or neurodivergent, is playing games or loves games or seeking to work in games. And this, like Harriet said, jumping in onto opportunities sort of thing. If you are just starting out, it's always a great idea to start creating content. I love making a podcast at DNA Games, and this is sort of my way of sort of understanding accessibility more. You may have similar things, whether that's playing games yourself, you might be a Twitch streamer. That is creating content. You might like writing articles about accessibility, of your reviewing games that you love. Again, this all helps the games developers out there see your viewpoint in accessibility and how you see games in general. A lot of people who review games in an accessibility standpoint, they do get a lot of the people that worked on said games reaching out to them and talking about that. It's a good way for you to connect to them. You might as well use it to your advantage if you come with that knowledge. And other way to plug for ManyCats, we have an expert page, which we have put a picture on the slide, which has a group of amazing people that are into accessibility consultancy, and they're sort of advertising what sort of areas they are knowledgeable at and what they can share about. And you should get yourself on there if you feel like you need to sort of want to advertise yourself as a freelancer. one of the main things, obviously, everybody will be asking is, well, how do I get paid, Chris? Now, I'd love to be a freelance accessibility consultant, but you know, how do I pay the bills at the end of the day? Again, this is all about being confident. You know, you need to know your worth. You are a professional and you're working in a professional industry, and you need to treat yourself as such, and that includes getting paid for your time or getting paid for your time. So a lot of studios or individual people will ask you about day rates and hourlies or how much you would charge per session. So you need to really start working about what you would need to charge to live comfortably in life. Like, you know, how much you would need to charge per day to be able to pay all your bills, etc. And this is what people will be asking when they're saying over there. In the next slide, I'll sort of show some details for you. But yeah, think about that for yourself, because it's very individual. It needs to be about how much money you need to pay your bills and or pay your support. So really think about that. And one of the big things to actually get paid, you need to be able to create an invoice to give to clients. This is the sort of way that they pay you. You sort of do a receipt of your services that you provided, and then give that to them, and they should be able to pay you. And this obviously ties into being planning ahead, because you know not everybody will pay straight away. You know, what happened if you don't get paid till the next month or the month after? Can you survive until then? You know, you need to sort of start planning, like whether you know you could live comfortably until you actually got paid. You know, if it came in late. So this is what we mean about planning ahead. You need to think about those sort of things. Harriet sort of mentioned it before about being wary about people asking just for an hour of your time, or trying just to steal an hour of your time, even, because you know you won't be able to give them a full accessibility like consult in an hour. Like, it's just impossible. There's so much to cover. Like, what you can do is be very clear about the outcome that they want. So if they just want an hour of your time, you need to be clear about, hey, yeah, I'll come in and I'll talk about my disability or my neurodiversity, and that is it, because that's all we can cover in that amount of time. You know, whether you sort of want to be a person that starts saying, oh, I only deal with, like, you know, in half days or full days only at a minimum, then, you know, you need to be confident in that. You know, a lot of people are sort of realizing that they won't get what they need out of accessibility consultants from a very short amount of time. And, you know, the games that get made aren't going to get their full value if you go get a consultant in for a full day. There's a quote on here about nothing about us without paying us, from an anonymous person with corgis. I'll let you work out who that is. But yeah, it's being very clear that, you know, we should be paid. You know, us as disabled, neurodiverse people, we also should get paid for our expertise, and it is expertise at the end of the day, and you need to remind yourself of that. This is covering a little bit of what we found out as many cats when we sort of doing a bit of research into the UK game scene in terms of accessibility consultants. I won't go into full details because I have the information here. So if you're new, obviously we've talked about jumping in to getting experiences, whether that's game jams and creating content, like we talked about in the previous slide. But if you're under 2 years, like work experience, we normally found that it's around £100 to £250 a day. And going for 2+ years, it's going up to about £500 to £750 a day. And then when you're an expert, or what we would say about 10 years plus, it's normally about £750 a day rate in the UK specifically. But obviously, like I said, this is a limited data size, and we're always keen to learn more from other accessibility consultants. So if you want to get in touch and talk about this further, you can do. Just drop us a line with some of the contact details at the end. But as we find out, this is all, you know, again, it's quite low paid because it's game industry. But this is sort of some of the realisticness of being an accessibility consultant that you sort of need to be aware of around about how much you probably get. But yeah, Harriet, next slide, please. In closing, just to remind people, you know, you always need to continue to educate yourself, because that's what we do. We're professionals, and we're always going to continue our professional development. And we're always clear now about what we can do. I think this is a hard lesson that both me and Harriet had to learn, is being clear about what we can deliver. You know, and that's something that we've learned as many cats about, you know, sort of what is a deliverable and what isn't. And this ties into some of the other things that Harriet said as well.
I mean, information about like games accessibility consultancy in particular, it's patchy at best. It's still, you know, although it's a decade. I'm not muted. I'm fine. I'm not muted. Is it muted for you? Right, is that better? Is that working? Right. So from information. Yeah, exactly. And obviously, information about game accessibility consultancy, it's patchy at best. It's a relatively new industry. While it's got a long history, uh, as it stands currently, and the progress we've been making in terms of accessible games, consulting itself, information, personal connections are often the only way that we find out what the rules are. Like, who to talk to, how do you do things, actually talking to people. And like Chris was saying, I love just taking up on opportunities. For better or worse, will say yes, because sometimes it's the only way to find out things. Because of that, all more information is needed. And like Chris said before, we are looking into researching more into the broader landscape of consulting for game accessibility and building up that information so we can get more diverse voices involved in accessibility consulting so that we can make games better. So we were Medicats, and this was Decoding Games, accessibility consultancy. You can follow us on Twitter at Minicat Studios, and you can come join our Discord if you want to ask any questions about being disabled or neurodiverse in the industry. Thank you for watching.